The bridge connecting Crimea to Russia has been hit by a large explosion. Ukrainian media reported a blast early in the morning local time. Russian authorities say they're investigating a truck bomb. The blast is purportedly shown here in an unverified social media video on the roadway span of the bridge, igniting several fuel tanks on the railroad span. Russian President Vladimir Putin opened the bridge in 2018 after Russia illegally annexed the Ukrainian peninsula. Further unverified videos also appear to show that a section of the bridge has collapsed due to the explosion. DW is no longer able to report from Russia because authorities withdrew our accreditation. So our correspondent, Kilian Bayer, is following the Russian reaction to the incident in Crimea from Rukla in Lithuania. Hello to you, Kilian. So what are you hearing from Russian authorities about this incident?
Well, like you said, the National Anti-Terrorist Committee said it was a car bomb. Now, fingers have been quickly pointed at Ukraine. The head of the Crimean parliament, Vladimir Konstantinov, was quick to say that it was indeed Ukrainian vandals who had gotten their bloody hands on the Crimean bridge. He went on to say that the Ukrainians had not managed to build anything in the last 23 years, and now that Ukraine is part of Russia, they are trying to destroy everything that Russia has built. But he went on to say that the bridge was not fully destroyed and would be quickly fixed. Now, according to the Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov, Putin has been getting reports from the Prime Minister, the Minister of Transportation and the Minister of Emergencies, and is being briefed about the situation. President Vladimir Putin is launching a committee which will investigate the source of the bombing, will look into the bombing. He's also being briefed by different security services like the FSB, which will be on board in this investigation. So we are hearing harsh sounds from Russia, but predictable at this standpoint, nothing that would be overly surprising.
Now, Kilian, what about the residents of Crimea, in particular the pro-Russian population there? What does this attack mean for them?
Well, I would say this attack is quite disconcerting for Russians on Crimea. We need to remember that Crimea, during the beginning stage of the war, even though it was a staging ground for the invasion, Crimea was fairly safe. People living there did not really see much of the war in the beginning. Then a few months ago, it started with attacks on military infrastructure in Crimea, like the Russian airbase, which was allegedly hit by drones, by Ukrainian drones. We saw following that a bit of panic and people leaving Crimea over this bridge. Now the bridge is destroyed or not functional, and even though Russian authorities are saying they're implementing a ferry service, it will be nowhere near the capabilities that this bridge had of getting people off. So, people are kind of cut off, and this is what this bridge symbolized. In 2018, when Putin opened this bridge in a grand ceremony with orange trucks, where Putin was driving a truck over the bridge, it symbolized the homecoming of Crimea to the motherland. Now that tie, that umbilical cord, you could say, has been severed. And the only connection really will be through ferries or over the newly illegally annexed territories of Russia, which are war-torn. So I would say people on Crimea are probably quite worried about the situation.
Well, Kilian, of course, Russia's neighbors are also very worried about developments in this war, including in Lithuania, which is where you are right now. And Germany's defense minister, Christine Lambrecht, is there today to inaugurate a new headquarters of a German combat brigade in Lithuania. Why is this so significant?
Well, I'm actually, like you said, in Rukla. This is the base where German and Lithuanian soldiers are stationed. And this day is important because it symbolizes that, Germany is at at Lithuania's side. Germany is here to support them. There have already been 1,600 soldiers stationed here in Lithuania, a German-led combat unit, a German battle group. Now an additional brigade of 2,500 soldiers is coming. The Lithuanians had been calling for an additional combat brigade. All of the Baltic states had been calling for more troops. And after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, Germany has responded by saying, we are at your side, we're sending more soldiers, we've allocated these 2,500 troops here. So, whatever happens, we will be here with you, but there's a catch.
DW's Kilian Bayer reporting for us from Rukla, Lithuania. Thank you so much, Kilian. Well, a short time ago, I spoke to Mike Martin, who is a War Studies Fellow at King's College in London, and I asked him who he believed was behind the explosion on the bridge in Crimea.
Well, it's almost certainly an attack by the Ukrainian armed forces. The bridge is out of the artillery range of the missile systems that Ukraine has, so it's not that, and so that leaves some sort of special forces or sabotage raid. There are only really two options for that. One is the truck bomb that the Russians seem to be talking about. The other is something on a boat. To do that much damage, you need to move significant amounts of explosive into position. So those are your two options, really. But it was absolutely done by the Ukrainian armed forces.
And why do you think an attack like this was not stopped by Russian air defenses or some other method of preventing an attack of this scale on that very significant bridge?
But you could ask the same question about any number of Ukrainian attacks recently. What we've seen over the last 3-4 months is that the Ukrainians have consistently outthought the Russians, and they've outfought them as well. And so I think most people expected the Kerch Bridge to come under attack, but perhaps later on in the war, perhaps when the Ukrainians had made more advances in the south, or perhaps retaken some territory in Donbass. But actually what the Ukrainians have been very good at is keeping everybody guessing. And so they've clearly decided that there's both symbolic and logistical advantage to dropping the bridge now, and so they've dropped it. The Russians simply weren't expecting it.
Now, tell us a bit more about this strategic significance and also the symbolic significance. I mean, how much of a detriment is it going to be to Russia's military effort having this bridge damaged, and what does it do to Russian morale?
Great question. So the Russian military relies on railways for a lot of its supplies. There's various historical reasons for that, but it's a very important fact. Now, if we look at the Russians in Crimea and in Kherson, which we've heard a lot about recently, there are only two rail links that move from Russia into that area. And one is on the Kerch Bridge that we've just seen destroyed, and the other one runs just to the north of Melitopol, which is that city in the south on the coast of the Black Sea. And about 2 days ago, the Ukrainians started attacking. The front lines are only about 30 kilometers away. Started attacking with artillery the Russian railway lines there in a place called Tokmak. Now they've dropped the bridge, so the Ukrainians are clearly isolating the Russian forces from their supplies. In terms of symbolism, the digests of Russian TV tonight are going to be absolutely fascinating. This bridge has Putin's name all over it. It's the symbolism of his project. And this comes at a time where there's already been lots of factions maneuvering in Moscow, blaming the military, blaming the Wagner Group, blaming Putin. The blame game has started, and such a symbolic attack by the Ukrainians is only going to accelerate that.
Now, you mentioned how important this bridge is for Vladimir Putin personally. And, he has threatened in the past that if the bridge would be targeted by Ukrainian forces, then Kiev would then be a direct target in retaliation. So are we likely to see a direct attack on Kiev now by Russian forces?
But Kiev has been a target throughout the war. It was under direct ground assault for the first 6 weeks of the war and has been under intermittent air and missile attacks since then. Over the last month or so, we've seen the introduction of Russian suicide drones in cities like Odessa. I don't see how attacking this bridge is going to change the Russian attacks on places like Kiev. And anyway, the way we should view attacks on civilians or on cities is of Russian impotence. In military terms, attacking civilians is A, illegal, and B, doesn't help you in your military effort. You should be attacking your opponent's military forces. So I don't think this is going to have a great effect on what Russia's going to do. It's another empty threat from Putin.
That was Mike Martin, War Studies Fellow at King's College in London. Mike, thank you so much for all of your insights.
Thank you.
DW correspondent Matthias Böninger is in Ukraine's city of Mykolaiv, and he told us more about the explosion on the Crimean bridge.
Yeah, you've said it. Parts of the road bridge have collapsed. There is a road bridge and a railway bridge next to each other, and the railway bridge is in flames because it seems that a fuel train has been hit, and now this fuel is burning. The damage is extensive. The bridge is out of use now. The Russian occupational authorities have said that they are going to introduce a ferry service at this point. Crimea is basically cut off from the Russian mainland via this route. There is, of course, still the so-called land bridge, the territories that Russia has conquered in the past few months that connected to Russia, but this is quite a severe damage, and the consequences will probably be felt throughout this war.
Well, Matthias, explain to our viewers the significance of this bridge. Just how important is it for Russia, both strategically and also politically?
When Russia annexed Crimea, they had no connection to this island. The territory that Crimea is a peninsula, and the territory that's on the other side, or that it's linked to, is Ukrainian and was controlled by Ukraine at the time. This bridge was the main supply route to Crimea. It's also been the main supply route for military equipment in this war, that military equipment that was going to the southern front. Russia has conquered the patch of land along the Azov Sea that is also connecting right now Crimea to the to Russia, but this is much more. It's much more difficult to bring in equipment via there. So this strike, and Ukraine has said for a long time that the bridge, which it considers an illegal construction, is a target for Ukraine, and this will have significant impact on the supply lines, on the Russian supply lines. Of course, the Russians should have expected that and might have taken some precautions, like stockpiling munitions, for example, in Crimea, but it will make it much more difficult for them to supply their troops in the south. We have an offensive in the south going on, a counter-offensive by Ukraine, which is taking back territories, and this will make it much more difficult for Russia to bring in new supplies, and it might weaken the Russian troops, the occupational troops, considerably.
Now, Matthias, the initial explanation from Russia is that this explosion was caused by a fuel tank catching fire. Is that a likely cause of this explosion?
We know that a fuel tank has caught fire, but it's not likely that this is the cause. If you look at the pictures, you see part of the road bridge that is next to these fuel tanks. These fuel tanks were a train. This part has collapsed, and the fuel tank, the part of the bridge where the fuel tank is burning, has not collapsed. So something must have caused this to collapse. Now, what it was, we don't know, and we might not know anytime soon, because Ukraine is usually very secretive about this kind of strikes, but we know that Ukraine has the means to attack territory deep behind the lines. We've seen attacks on an airfield on Crimea that's about as far from the lines as this bridge, and it is very likely that this strike was done actually by the Ukrainian military.